This video is not intended to encourage or glorify any kind of drug use. The sole purpose of these videos is to educate you on the dangers of what these substances can do to you. Please do not do any of the acts mentioned in this video. I repeat, do not do any of the acts mentioned in this video.
Welcome to the world of Tales from the Trip.
I was what the kids these days call a poly-addict. Any way to get high would get me by. I'd slowly managed to wean myself off prescriptions, psychedelics, and amphetamines, and I had already committed to knocking on the head my last three vices: alcohol, weed, and cigarettes. I'd sort of rested on my laurels for that trio through their combined social acceptance and availability. Basically, long story short, it all came to a head when I was juggling through one or the other, or all three again every night for months till I decided, tonight's the night, I'm staying completely clean tonight. But it was not the case. Instead of steadying my reserve, I gave in at about 9 p.m. and drank the last bottle of alcohol in the house, a whole bottle of bitters. Then I found the Chinese cooking wine, finished that. Then I scraped all the resin from my pipes and smoked all that. And then I raided my ashtray and dried all the wet cigarette butts in the oven at 2 a.m. and smoked those too, fully aware I was starting work in less than 4 hours. I'd only really hurt myself and disappointed others over the years through my terrible life choices, but the sickening hangover the next day and the absolute shame I felt and still feel to this day about that evening convinced me I really needed to get my shit together. I still remember when I woke up that next day. My mouth tasted like I'd been eating a fermented asshole. My boyfriend died of an overdose, and I showed up late to his funeral because I was high as fuck on the drug that killed him. I don't even remember being there. I am now 2 years clean. A friend told me while at a party I was hosting, "You live an unsustainable lifestyle." He's not the closest friend I have, but he's someone I look up to. Just a year older, but a very hard worker. I thought about how he conducts life versus how I was conducting mine, and it was embarrassing. So I put the bottle down finally. I still drink, but not like I used to. It was rock bottom because it hit me pretty hard. Just the circumstance of someone going out of their way to help make me realize what I was doing. Didn't take my closest friends to do it. It was someone who just said it, and it hit me a certain way. I didn't drink until college, but when I did, I hit it like a freight train. By the time I was in my late 20s, I was having withdrawal seizures. Had my first one December 26, 2016, and that kept up until 2020. I was hospitalized multiple times for them and had more than one unreported, once at work, but I don't think anyone really noticed or cared enough to do anything substantial about it, even myself. Every day I would vomit and feel sick. I had bruises everywhere from God knows what, but I never really cared enough to change. Between me and my husband, we were going through 3 handles of cheap vodka a week. What broke me, us, it, whatever, was my husband's body giving out February 2020, just as the world fell apart too. Our dog died February 15th, and I think a part of us did too. For my husband anyways, it was his liver and kidneys. They had finally had enough and called it quits. By the time he got to the ER February 23rd, he was a Simpsons character. As he got treatment, I stayed by his side, still drinking insanely, but now he was in the hospital, so I was alone. In mid-March, he somehow got a transfer to Stanford and started the process for a liver and kidney transplant with about a 30% chance of survival. His family hated me at this point, and I was forbidden to contact him, and I broke. There was no one, especially now with COVID making its debut, to help or care about me. For 2 weeks, I drank, seized, vomited, cut myself, fell downstairs. It was actually this exact time 3 years ago where I was all alone with no one but vodka and my cat, and somehow I didn't die. Then the lockdown was officially called for California March 25th, and my MIL decided to evict me the same day, so my parents begrudgingly drove the 4 hours to get me, load up their car with as much of my crap, but mostly toilet paper, as possible, and I lived in their basement for 3 years while I picked up the pieces of my little life. I couldn't quit cold turkey. I was still having seizures at this point, but I weaned myself off slowly, and now on day 990, Comma Club, here I come. When my best friend and partner of 7 years left me, when I experienced stimulant psychosis and couldn't leave the house, it lasted a long time, second scariest experience of my life. When that happened again and I got hospitalized multiple times, this period of psychosis was the scariest time in my life. When I realized all my friends were gone or keeping their distance. I woke up on a park bench one morning with no money, no food, no clue how I got there, and no real friends to call for help. Despite all of those things, my first conscious thought was, fuck me, I'm out of blow. After a few minutes of pondering ways I can get my next high, something clicked and I realized how pathetic I was. I spent the rest of that day really thinking about what I was doing with my life and what kind of person I had become. Late that evening, I swallowed my pride and called my parents, who I hadn't spoken to in almost 2 years, and told them I was sorry and I needed help. Fortunately for me, my parents were very understanding and agreed to let me come home as long as I remained sober. That was 12 years ago. I am 30 now and have my own house, a beautiful supportive wife, and we own our own small business that is doing better and better every year since we opened. I quit my job, left my girlfriend, sold my truck, took my cat to the pound, ruined friendships, violated trust, sold a bunch of stuff I had since I was a child, threw away some irreplaceable knickknacks that I truly wish I still had to this day, and I scrapped my second car, all so I can get high all the time. Luckily, my family didn't give up on me, and after a few years, I woke up and realized I didn't want to live like that anymore. I was lonely, broke, semi-homeless, and I felt like the end was coming for me. Now, 4 years later, I have my baby girl to look after, and I would never put her at risk by destroying my body or altering my mind in any way. She didn't cause me to quit my awful lifestyle, only because she wasn't even a thought at the time. But ever since she was born, I've never even felt the urge to do anything more than smoke a cigarette, and I haven't touched those in 8 months. 100% clean for 8 months now, and I've never felt better. Not an addict myself, unfortunately he only realized he really needed to stop right before it killed him. My fiancé was a severe alcoholic. At his worst, he drank half a gallon of vodka a day. He'd been trying to quit for a while, off and on. I kept trying to get him to stop. I'd go to doctor's appointments with him, and he would always avoid saying he was an alcoholic because he didn't want it on his medical record. He hadn't been feeling well for a while. He had to quit drinking 2 or 3 days before because we were broke, and he asked me to take him to the hospital. We got into triage, and the nurse was going through intake questions with him, and he said, "I'm an alcoholic." That shocked me. That's how I knew it was rock bottom, because he had been so adamant that no medical professional knows he's an alcoholic. But this time, he didn't even hesitate. His liver was failing, and a week later, he died. I wish so badly that he could have gotten better and turned it around. I really think he could have if he survived, but I also think he knew it was the end. I was a heavy drinker for decades. At my worst, I was a blackout drunk that would burn through a handle of vodka every other day. I'd convinced myself that I could stop at any time. After a particularly rough week, I was tired of being constantly depressed and thought I could quit cold turkey. I thought I could tough it out, man up, and fight through the shakes or whatever. I ended up in the ER. That was a shitty wake-up call for a number of reasons. First, I realized I had way less control over my drinking, which was scary. Second, I was treated like dog shit by the folks in the ER, and then in the hospital too. While I understand that drunks are a giant pain in the ass, and maybe there are more dire patients with issues, I also almost died, and instead of any sort of understanding or sympathy as to why I was doing what I did, they just called me stupid and a dumbass, and eventually transferred me to a room for 2 days where I was left alone without any explanation. Ultimately, when I was released, I felt so low about myself and just broken and depressed that I went straight to a liquor store on my way home. I didn't realize I was basically detoxed and had a shot at staying sober. After 6 months of trying to wean myself off of booze, unsuccessfully, by trying to drink less over time, etc., I finally gave in and checked myself into rehab, detoxed and spent 30 days there. I'll hit 5 years sober in June. I tell people about this just to let folks know that their rock bottom doesn't always mean the day before they get sober. It's when you're at your worst and doesn't end until you start the fight to get better. My rock bottom lasted years, and the road up out of it wasn't quick. We never know what people are going through, so everyone needs whatever compassion you can spare. It's also okay not to be able to spare any. Three-year IV heroin coke addict here, almost 4 years clean now. My biggest hustle was selling all my mother's jewelry to the local pawn shop. She had so much that she never wore, like literally a chest full, and this went on for 2 years. Rock bottom was her finally discovering that her entire chest was empty, and she took me down to the pawn shop in person, and she had to spend an unbelievable amount of money to buy it back. The next day, I sold all of it to a different pawn shop, got kicked out of my parents' house shortly thereafter. Shit, I don't know. Losing multiple jobs, losing my home, my family, fucking up multiple other relationships, I don't know. One event that comes to mind is posting up in the bathroom with a half-gallon of vodka. I couldn't really drink it because the shakes were so bad I couldn't really put the bottle up to my mouth and hold it there long enough to get decent drinks. I also was puking so much as soon as I took a shot, it was coming right back up. I'm freaking the fuck out because I was on a bender before this and know I have to get some alcohol in me. It was a long process of me taking drinks, puking it back up moments later, but I just kept doing it, knowing each time I was absorbing at least a bit. Spilled vodka all over myself along the way too. Spent hours on the floor of the bathroom before finally going to my couch and spending the rest of the day there drinking and feeling rough. Pretty sure that was the day I texted someone that I just couldn't stop drinking. Once on another occasion, I woke up in some public bathroom of a store that's a pretty good walk from my home. Like, how I got there, how long I had been there, I have no idea. I used to wake up in a lot of weird places. My first seizure from alcohol withdrawal was quite the experience too. I hadn't even realized I had one. I thought I just nodded out and fell asleep for a brief moment. The only reason I knew I had one is because someone else saw it. That was kind of a weird thing because it made me wonder if I'd been having them before and just not realizing it. I don't really chew my tongue up or piss my pants too often when they happen, so it's really hard to tell a lot of times. Once I didn't eat for over a week on a bender, and I guess it fucked up my brain chemistry for a bit because I couldn't tell what was a hallucination and what wasn't. I basically went into psychosis for a while and had to be hospitalized for a bit. That was kinda scary just not knowing what was really going on. Definitely started to try to force myself to eat more while drinking, but sometimes that's really difficult. I was in an explosion in Iraq. 8 hours of brain surgery, 5 hours of shoulder reconstruction, 3 hours of leg surgery, had neck and lower back nerve damage that was too risky to operate on. The army had me on gabapentin and oxycodone for 3 years. Then the army doc was worried I was developing a pill addiction, the whole hand-to-mouth thing he said, and put me on fentanyl pain patches. For the next 3 years, I was on 5 different meds for PTSD/depression and 3 different pain meds. Pain meds were oxycodone, fentanyl, and Lyrica. I was somehow able to make it to 20 years before being medically retired. My last 2 years I hardly remember. After retiring, the VA said fentanyl was bad for me and just stopped it, cold turkey, but I had been worried about that, so I'd saved up about 40 patches. I went to a civilian doctor and got back in them in 45 days. The VA had increased my oxycodone and also put me on Valium and threw all the Xanax at me I wanted. This went on for 5 years after retirement. All of a sudden, the VA went crazy about pain meds and Xanax and told me I had 30 days to wean myself off or go to a detox or rehab. Then I started drinking heavily and getting Xanax by trading my stash of oxys for it. The oxys were no longer doing anything for me due to the patches, so I had a bunch of them. Towards the end of my active addiction, I was drinking 18 beers, half a fifth of Jack, taking 8 to 10 milligrams of Xanax a day, and still on fentanyl. One day, I was in my garage, fucking high and drunk, and all of a sudden, my .45 was in my mouth, and I had 3 pounds of pressure on a 4-pound trigger. It suddenly occurred to me that I didn't want my wife finding my brains splattered everywhere. Then it occurred to me insurance may or not pay out. I put the gun down and decided to sober up in the near future and create an accident for myself. The next morning, when my wife left for work, I went into the garage, and on top of my keyboard, I'd spend hours out there getting fucked up and high. There was a phone number and date I'd written down. I called the number, and it was a rehab place with a military-only unit. I went to rehab a couple days later and tested positive for everything but pregnancy. I'd been doing every drug I can get my hands on by that point. 8 days in detox and another 20 days in rehab, then 120 days in IOP later. My head was only fuzzy. 8 months after rehab, my head cleared up. 27 months later, I had my first healthy liver test come back. Had I not stopped when I did, the doc said I had about 6 months of drinking and drugging before my liver would have led to my death. Now 4 years and 2 months clean and sober, I'm heavily involved in the veteran recovery community. I sit on 2 different boards for recovery-oriented services and live a life I never thought would be possible. Drinking about every day to make me feel good, which then spread into taking a beer with me when I went to class. Then I started drinking at work, on the bus to work, even carrying a case around in my backpack and skipping class to sit outside and drink. I ended up getting caught at work, and my boss called me in to tell me he had to fire me. I was drunk during that meeting too. I ended up going home and slashing my arm open, then meant to go to the bar and continue to drown my misery and play pool, but I never made it. Ended up nearly passing out outside my apartment where a cleaning lady found me and called 911. Police and paramedics came, took me to the hospital, which was my second alcohol-related visit in 4 months. Had to get stitches for my arm, which is now a nasty scar that I lie about how I got it. The worst was hearing my mother cry when she came to visit me. I am not completely sober, but I definitely don't drink depressed anymore. My drug of choice was meth. I woke up from a 2-week-long blackout in a different state with a strange man who, as it turns out, was grooming me for human trafficking the entire time I was with him. When I came to, I needed to go to the hospital for severe dehydration and an infection that almost caused me to lose my toe. My mom and neighbor committed me to inpatient treatment. I've been sober for 107 days now, except herb. Probably my rock bottom was when I had been kicked out of my house a few years and was bad on crack, so how I used to get money for my dose was I stole an urn from a house and emptied the ashes out and would collect ashes from random fires I lit under bridges and get sunglasses and a cane and walk around with the urn pretending to be blind and bump into people and knock the urn so the ashes would spill out and start crying and give people a sob story about how they're my dead mother's ashes and that I was homeless and that was all I had of her to try to keep me going in cold nights. People would feel bad. They'd give me as much as they could for a hotel or whatever, and as you know, hotels aren't cheap, so I'd go and get lit off my brains and then repeat the cycle, and it worked for quite a bit until I'd done it so high one time that instead of sympathy, I got a smack and was dazed. When I finally came through, I looked up and thought I saw God, but no, it was my own damn mother. She dragged me up and got me into treatment, and we're okay now, but she says she knows who isn't going to be getting her ashes when she dies. I had my first drink when I was 16. By 18, I was drinking whole liter bottles of scotch every night. I used to get drunk and cut myself up with my razor. I was severely depressed. I hated myself. Every minute of my life was spent waiting until my next drink, figuring out how I was going to afford my next bottle. I tried to kill myself so many times. I slept with strangers twice my age. I stole and sold precious items. I used to do anything for my next drink. Then, at 21, I was engaged to my fiancé. I realized he was working very hard to start a future for us where we could be happy. He would clean my blood up with no distaste on his face. He used to ask if he could please just watch, because at least that way he would be able to give me first aid if I went too deep or did too much. He's a good man. I realized that if I kept drinking, he was going to move on and I'd lose him. I went to rehab last year. I am 23 now and sober. I don't even smoke cigarettes anymore. My body is covered in heavy scarring. My blood just came back last month as good. I have fully healed physically. We are still planning the wedding. For me, it was because I realized I was about to lose my future.